I was actually going to bring that up because, like, the common right-wing contention is always like, well, we don't even have a free market. Contention one, there is no free market anyways, because we already have all these regulations. And they're like, so we actually haven't seen perfect capitalism. And the thing that I always say too, because their common argument is that, like, name one communist country that works. You just say that we haven't seen true communism yet. It's like the same damn thing. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, I think that all four of us can agree that, like, the capacity for infinite wealth generation is unnecessary and in many cases immoral. I think that we can agree that, like, having billionaires in our society that control, like, who gets elected is probably not the best thing.
Probably.
I think we can agree that, like, you should have access to the medicine that you need. You should have access to a roof over your head and food. And that in itself by nature is anti-capitalist.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Discourse Debrief. This is episode 10. We've hit the decade mark. I just checked because we didn't know last week.
But we were right. We guessed 9, didn't we?
I honestly don't remember.
Okay,
I don't either. I wasn't
retcon that
there.
and say that we did guess 9.
Yep, we were right. No questions asked.
I've never been wrong.
I'm always right. Never left.
Don't we have announcements?
Yes, I'm getting there. I'm Logan.
I'm Peyton.
I'm Alex.
Robert.
Okay. The only announcement we have is May 6th. Once again, we are having our end of semester debate. That'll be on the mall, probably around 6:30.
It's reserved from 7 to 8:30.
Okay, perfect. So 7 on the mall. It'll be pretty.
Ted's gonna get your ass for not knowing the exact time, Logan.
At least one of us does. It'll be pretty hard to miss us. Like, we'll be right there. So, yeah, tune in for that. We're debating diversity in higher education. I'm in the debate. Robert's in the debate. Blossom, who's not with us today, and then a couple other people from the
And Peyton is moderating, actually.
Yes.
I am moderating.
Yes. He's going to be the big dog, as they say.
He's
That's
gonna
what
be
they
the
call me.
lion.
But I'm also the big dog today because
is
it is
true.
my topic. I haven't been here for a while, but first, I'm going to introduce our guest, Alex. Alex, friend of mine, we had Japanese class, a few of them together, went to Japan for a study abroad together, and now we are coworkers. We burger weekly. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Burger.
I mean, we burger weekly.
Hardly know her.
Classic. I'm like a junior, I guess, at U of A here. I'm an economics major, and I also study Japanese language and world literatures. And yeah, excited to be here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And today, we're going to jump right into it. This is going to be a fun
Let's
one.
get right into the news.
I'm
Yes, sir.
terrified. He said he's an econ major. Oh, God, where are we going with this?
Well, the question is, would socialism work in America? So,
Oh Lord.
oh Lord, yeah, hence this beautiful artist rendition. That might be AI, probably not.
It probably is.
But
I don't think it's AI.
Anywho, let's start
Internet
with
theory.
what we think
A goon through
socialism is, right? Socialism, a lot of people conflate it with communism, God forbid.
You
And-
did. That's why you put Stalin up there.
I know, I did that on purpose so that we could talk about this as a point. But let's start with you. You
Me?
probably know the most about socialism, I would
no,
imagine.
I don't.
What?
Well, what do you know? What does socialism mean to you?
How much do you know about socialism?
Probably not a lot. Huh?
Gosh. Yeah, starting with me was not the way to go. Actually, maybe it was, because then we can just get progressively better in our understanding.
That's what socialism is.
Amen.
I guess it is a system of economics where you have social, like, programs that kind of ensure the health and, I don't know, progression, I guess, of society. It's just like a very loose definition to what I understand. And then what that might look like in an individual country can, like, kind of vary, I think, but that's like the broad principle as far as I know.
Contention 1. You used the word social
I
when
was gonna
defining
say the same.
socialism.
Well, we'll give it to Alex then. What does that mean to you, socialism?
No, I think that's like a good jumping off point, and I think, like, is a good thing for people to think about if they don't have like a fantastic understanding of socialism. I think, like, kind of by definition, it's really just a economic/social system where workers own the means of production. From like a Marxist perspective, it's like the transition from capitalism to communism, essentially. But I like that first definition.
I agree with Alex's. I don't think there's really much to add to that. I think that there's like a lot of nuance that you can see because obviously it differs from country to country. Like what socialism means in one country manifests differently in every country because of different cultures or different religions or different needs, just different history. But yeah, like broadly, that's pretty much what it is.
And you picked up on a very good point that I kind of hinted at with me incorrectly putting this image up here. We often, when we hear socialism, everybody's like, communism, socialism, it's the same damn thing. You mentioned it's kind of a transition period. What is the distinction between like socialism and communism, if there is one?
I would say that communism is that it's a classless society is basically what the Marxist theory of communism is. And so since we can't just go from capitalism straight to having a classless, perfect utopian, basically, there's that transitory period that's needed.
And what would that look like?
Socialism.
Bro used the word socialism to define socialism.
Yeah.
Is that like policy changes? Is it cultural? Like, what is the distinction between like capitalism we have today, that transition, what does that look like into that utopia, right?
I think that it starts, like, you see it all the time with those policies, like with a redistribution of wealth, for example, or with like the land reform that happened in China, for example, where they had thousands of years of this history of oppression of people and they redistributed the land, albeit in a way that wasn't, necessarily perfect, but that's still what that looked like. And like you can, like I said, it's different for every country. Like in Denmark, for example, that's a social democracy. So that's a democracy that's socialist in nature, and that's moving towards a society that's more equal.
Yeah. I think really like it's a really, really like difficult thing to fully conceptualize America specifically transitioning just because of like its position in global markets and even like domestic stuff. It's just like when you look at Amazon or something, for example, that just has like this giant like breadth of like influence and how much of the market that it controls, whatever. But when you do look at like the Nordic countries like Denmark and Sweden, these places sort of have like what I feel is a pretty good example of like how America would look should it decide to institute some of these policies. One thing that I want to address is you brought up like the sort of cultural element to it. And I think that that's like kind of the biggest block for America, or at least one of the biggest blocks, because we're just like, obviously in like late stage capitalism and the sort of like hyper individualistic like neoliberal ideology where it's like, I'm only going to look out for me and mine. That really needs a sort of like cultural shift for anything socialist to take place here.
Mm-hmm.
I would disagree a little bit. I mean, like Marx said himself, obviously, that the potential for communism in the United States is bigger than almost anywhere in the world because of the mass of workers that we have here. I don't think that the hyper-individualism is necessarily a problem. Like, we've seen historical examples of revolutions that blended universalism and individualism perfectly, or close to perfect. I think that there's a possibility for that in the United States. I just think that we need to keep into account that, like, the United States is very much, this is going to be very, very controversial, it's very much an artificial structure, right? I mean, like, we talk about the United States as if it's like this natural one big country that should be there.
Yeah, no.
But, like, the way that we were formed and the way that we, like, expanded to encompass so many people, there was nothing particularly natural about that. And if we were going to transition to a society that was more equitable, we would have to start looking at, like, why do we have so much territory in the first place? Why do we have to consider so many different things?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of jump in on like the cultural and political aspect, like specifically on like how do we get to that point. It goes to the age-old question, like, does culture shape politics or does politics shape culture? Like, kind of which came first?
Prompt 4, shout out Regents.
And I think they kind of go hand in hand, so I think you need a little bit of both to even
definitely
think of trying to make that transition.
Well, kind of like to take a step back, but to eventually lead us back into the American question. You mentioned, was it Denmark is a social democracy?
Yeah.
would that be considered socialist or social democracy meaningfully different in some kind of way? And B, do we have other examples of like definitionally socialist countries working today that we can kind of look at and maybe study? I mean, not perfectly map onto the U.S. for the reasons and so many more that you just mentioned, but just as a kind of starting point for like, I don't know, actualization, I guess.
I mean, social democracies are socialist. It's part of it. They're not obviously like socialism is such a broad term, but it's basically, I think when you distill it down to Logan's definition at the beginning, you can see that there's a lot of countries that are moving towards socialism. And it's not like socialism is this big naughty term around the rest of the world that it is in the United States. I mean, France was socialist for a huge portion of the Cold War, like the Scandinavian countries, except ironically enough, except for Sweden, since their last election, are socialists too. So yeah, there's lots of countries. Vietnam, I think, is a pretty good example of a working socialist country. I can't say China because of their they're doing some naughty things over there.
Naughty. But I think one thing I'll say, like to your question, is like I don't think there's one thing that just brands you as a socialist country. Like there's no one thing like you're a socialist country now. In America, we probably think like that.
Yeah.
At least a lot of people on the right because like socialism, but like. There's no one like qualification.
Socialism is when government do things.
Do good things.
Yeah, I think that they're like definitionally. I'm not entirely sure if there is like a single country that like is branded fully as socialist. Yeah. Like even with Denmark and stuff, like capitalism still exists, but there are sort of like socialist policies and programs that really benefit people.
So like to kind of build that understanding, I know that you're an econ. Have you like studied socialism at all in your classes?
No.
Okay. Then this will be kind of freeballing it then. But so like we have like socialist policies. Those like are individual things that we can pretty easily label maybe as socialist or non-socialist. Is there kind of like a point, like eventually you add enough grains to the pile and it becomes a pile kind of thing for socialism? Is that how we kind of get there, or what it would look like?
I think that like what you see is a lot of mixed methods because I mean it's so easy to get into like theory crafting or what makes this or that, but like we're talking about real people at the end of the day, so I don't think that it is just like enough grains. Like yeah, obviously Denmark is still capitalist in a lot of ways, and they're not perfect, and no country is, but like when we say like, oh yeah, that's an example of something we can move towards. Like, that's what I think socialism is, at least. Like, when I think about communism or Marxism, that's what I think about. I don't think about, like, let's start with the end. I think about let's start with moving towards the end.
Let's just start.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think that, like, the thing that would sort of darken the line of, like, a gray area between socialism and capitalism is really just sort of, like, a removal of, like, a free market idea, essentially, where, like, like Denmark, like these places that we've been talking about, like essentially a free market exists, probably like with more regulations than we see here in the States. But yeah, like if there was no free market, then it's kind of like, okay, that is can be clearly categorized as like not capitalism, probably socialism.
Yeah.
What would you like say to like an argument of like a free market is impossible with regulations? Because like by definition, if you're regulating something, it's not free, depending on how you define free.
I was actually going to bring that up because like the common right-wing contention is always like, well, we don't even have a free market. Contention one, there is no free market anyways, because we already have all these regulations, and they're like, so we actually haven't seen perfect capitalism. And the thing that I always say too, because their common argument is that like, name one communist country that works. You just say that we haven't seen true communism yet. It's like the same damn thing, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, I think that all four of us can agree that like the capacity for infinite wealth generation is unnecessary and in many cases immoral. I think that we can agree that like having billionaires in our society that control like who gets elected is probably not the best thing.
Probably.
I think we can agree that like you should have access to the medicine that you need. You should have access to a roof over your head and food. And that in itself, by nature, is anti-capitalist.
And that should be like a universal basic human right.
Yeah, I agree. And also adding, like, capitalism in a perfect free market would, like, quickly destroy the environment faster than it already is and has. So,
So, like, is there like a just like non-free market? Like what's the word for like non-free market? Like free
Mixed.
market and what's the opposite called? Like the term? I don't know.
It would be like a planned economy.
Yeah.
Planned economy.
Yeah.
Okay. And that would be like a federal government or like state entity like sets, how would they even decide like numbers for that? I'm trying to gauge like what it would look like. Like, are there going to be more taxes like everybody's afraid of? Is it entirely like an economic thing, or are there more like removed policies that would influence like the likes of elections or whatever? Like, what would these policies look like, I guess?
Well, I'm not a policy crafter myself, but I'll try to answer that. I mean, like we've been talking about, there's people all over the world, and especially in the United States, who hold like immense amounts of wealth. Like Elon Musk, $400 billion. I think it's almost $500 billion now.
Not anymore.
Yeah. He's actually been, like, despite his stocks dropping, he makes more money every day just because, you know, he's in the government. So, but yeah, no, people like that, their money just goes up and up. Like, they make money for breathing, basically. While, you know, there's like, he has more money than 56% of Americans, like the bottom 56% of Americans. Elon Musk has more money than.
Like combined.
Yeah.
He makes more money in an hour than a lot of us will make in a lifetime.
Exactly. So like when you talk about, oh yeah, a lot of us are worried about taxes. It's like, well, we shouldn't be, you know? Who should be worried about taxes? It's like Elon Musk and Bill Gates should be worried about taxes because they could give away like 10% of their wealth and make it back in a year.
Yeah. And like
Solve so many issues.
Yeah, no, seriously. I think it's like 10%, like the top 10% of, you know, like wealth holders or whatever in America own like 88% of the stock market. And that just like, you know, destroys like upward mobility for like a lot of people and like, you know, retirement savings, that sort of thing. And then I think like the top 1% owns like 50% of like, I don't know how those numbers like work together, but yeah,
It's a lot.
It's a lot. So like, I don't know, when it gets down to the nitty gritty where you're like, who should own it? Is it the federal government? Is it the state government? I think that the federal government should be setting regulations. It should be setting like, you have to use your money for this, or there shouldn't be like infinite creation of wealth because you're not using that wealth to help other people. And if you have all this wealth, it should be like redistributed to help other people. Like if you own more money than, you know, the bottom 56% of Americans, then maybe you should be using that money to like, I don't know, build houses or something like that.
And I think that starts with, like you mentioned, taxes, like just rewriting the tax code.
Yeah.
Because like this is the one thing that I'll give Trump credit for is in his debate with Clinton, he said like, yeah, it's I abuse it, you abuse it too. The tax code is screwed up.
Yeah.
And like that's like
I won't give him credit for that because we all know that, and he was just like spitting in our face. But he said that.
But that's like the one moment like,
He's
damn.
like,
He kind
no
of
one
like
could stop me.
said something that was true. That's incredible. But yeah.
And to kind of get back to your original question, like for a planned economy, essentially, this is like one of the sort of like boogeymen that I think a lot of people that are like caught up in like all the Red Scare stuff or whatever you want to call it kind of point to is like bread shortages, like food shortages, these kind of things that like we can point to the Soviet Union having like pretty substantial failures in. And, you know, the one thing that I think like markets, free markets or whatever are good at doing is sort of like being able to set and track kind of supply and demand issues. And that is like one of the things that you see with a planned economy where you're, you know, trying to do the math basically, where you're saying, okay, how much bread do we need? Like that kind of thing. And it's like, will producers make this bread if they like past a certain point aren't going to be able to profit off of it? So it's tricky. I mean, like it's not like we're looking at socialism as a kind of simple solution to anything. And yeah, I think that's like, you know, obviously one of the harder things. And I know that in the beginning, the Soviets like literally sat down with pencil and paper and tried to work it out. And like, obviously we have a lot more advantages and resources now. And I think that like, you know, we would have an easier time doing that in today's society. But
I also think that like we've seen so many innovations in like political theory where we've realized like, a move towards like communism doesn't necessarily mean that the government has to plan out every single aspect of your lives, which is something that people think it means. Like in China, Deng Xiaoping, for example, said like, okay, the peasants, they can have like create their little capitalist economies because they know like it's faster, right? And that's true because the state can't respond to like a village's needs as fast as it can respond to like a sector of the entire economy's needs. But the peasants, however, they know what they need, you know? They know like, oh, like we need more food, so we're gonna trade with our neighbors for more food. That makes sense, and that's not inherently anti-socialist. And it's not, I don't think it's inherently capitalist. It's just like barter economy,
scale.
basically.
Yeah.
The thing that is capitalist is the scale, exactly. It's when you have these corporations, like all like 95% of the news we consume is controlled by 9 companies. Like that's insane.
Well, you guys have kind of touched on it, kind of transitioning transitioning a little closer to the question at hand. You mentioned the fear of like shortages, supply and demand struggles. Like people, especially on the right, are afraid, right? I mean, I don't know how accurate this is, but like a lot of people like see like Stalin equals communism equals socialism and think that like some kind of communist regime is going to appear and that the government's going to become authoritarian, people are going to lose rights. And these are all, I think, I could be wrong, but I imagine popular conceptions, at least in talking to my family. They're afraid they're going to lose freedom, innovation's going to go down, all of these kinds of things. I don't know, what do you guys make of how these, I don't know, problems in their heads have come about, and are they actually real problems that would come about?
I think there are some like actual problems. I don't think you can ever say you can transition from one system to another without there being a headache or without there being like growing pains.
Or there being a system at all without growing pains.
Exactly.
Not even just the transition. Just like
that's another thing. The historical evidence that they have at hand is what they've been taught and what they've seen. And what they've seen is the Soviet Union, which was not perfect. It was far from it. And like some of the greatest atrocities happened under them. Or like in modern day China, which is like supposed to be the big boogeyman of the United States, is China. So all of these examples that they have at hand are bad. And they have this historical conception of that, like, oh, socialism equals Stalin, basically, which isn't necessarily true, but it's what they believe. And then also at the same time, people are I don't think that it's talked about enough. I think that even like we have left-wing populists like Bernie Sanders, for example. I don't think he's out there like saying like we need a socialist country, you know, but he will advocate for things that we like everyone's recognizing as like, oh shit, he's right about this. Yeah. Like that's why his like his rally in Tucson, for example, was the biggest rally in Arizona history. It's not even an election year, and all he did was talk about how America is descending into oligarchy, which is like, you know, obvious. But he doesn't label it as socialism. So people are starting to think of these as just like, oh, these are just like the things that we need without that label, which is helpful. But it's the right will always see it as, you know, not.
Yeah. To the point of like people talking about it. And like you're absolutely right that there are issues with this system, and people are right to have some misgivings. However, like I will say,
the centrist arrives.
The people that are, you say like they are talking about it. There's a lot of talk about it on the right. Like these people that are in power from the right, they are the ones like actually peddling a lot of this misinformation, a lot of this fear mongering, and because they know that socialism does not work with their ideology, at least in the American climate. So it's like they can't let it fester.
I think that the American right has done like. I will give this to them. I gave it to them the first time I was ever a guest as well. I think that they've done an excellent job in like catering kind of their political swing towards the poorer like white Americans. They've done an excellent job at that, whereas like Democrats, I won't say the left because I don't consider Democrats very left, but the Democrats have done an excellent job at alienating them.
Yeah.
Where when you like obviously the whole culture war thing that started, we all recognize that there's huge problems, right? With racism and sexism in our country. But when the Democrats, they did two things, in the last two elections especially, last three probably, where they just focused, one, on trying to court Republicans that didn't like Trump over to the Democrats, which doesn't work. It's never worked. It never will. And the second thing is they didn't focus on like the economic disadvantages of all Americans. Like, you know, if you're a poor white American and you're hearing that, like, you're hearing this politician is like, yeah, we want all these people to vote for us, except, you know, white people. Then you're like, okay, like, well, what about me? I'm poor too. And it's like, you don't necessarily recognize that, you know, what they're saying is true. Like, there is racism and sexism in the system, but that's not what they want to hear. When you can't afford bread, that's not what you want to talk about.
Do you think, you know, Democrats have kind of like ignored the poor white, you know, demographic? Do you think that's purely like a rhetorical and like framing issue, or does their policy reflect that as well?
I think that their policy reflects it in some ways. For example, I know during Obama's term, they were doing a lot of deforestation up in like northern Washington, where I used to live, and it caused like the biggest landslide in history ever, and it destroyed an entire neighborhood and killed all these people. And that was only framed as like, whoops, like, this isn't our fault. There was no way we could have stopped this. But obviously, it was like the policy that led to that was that zoning act, which I think you guys may have remembered, where he said that certain neighborhoods had to build high-rise apartments to become more like urbanized, more inclusive. It was that policy that led to them deforesting without like any insight, any research into the area. And that's what led to them cutting down all those trees, which led to the landslide, which led to the neighborhood being destroyed. So that was like one-to-one, like, this policy, which was not helping people, led to this thing, which killed a bunch of people, which led to him being like, oh, there's nothing we could have done about that. Yeah. So in some ways, like some kind of esoteric ways, I guess you could say, like, yeah, the policy, it hurts them, but I don't think it's like a genuine goal of them to try to hurt any like poor people in general, broadly, especially not hurting poor white people. In fact, like, every political party benefits white people in this country. It's just the fact that it's like an optics thing. You know what I mean?
Okay, that's pretty much what I was asking.
Yeah. To answer your question plainly, it's an optics thing. It's like what I said. If you can't afford gas or you can't put food on your table, and then someone's telling you like you should be caring about like bathrooms, you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah. I think that there's like, you know, like the current Democratic Party, I wouldn't say is doing really anything to sort of like cater to like poor white voters. I mean, I don't remember like when these policies were sort of like instituted, but like minimum wage and like Social Security, like those are socialist policies.
Yeah.
And you know, they're geared toward taking care of people and ensuring that they can afford to live comfortably. I mean, obviously, like, the minimum wage law right now doesn't afford people like a comfortable life or whatever, but you know, in their inception and in the early institution of these policies, like, yeah, like those are things that, like, I'm assuming that they're coming from Democrats that are like, you know, geared toward those constituencies or whatever.
Well, like, I mean, we're talking about the Democratic Party. I don't think we really even know what they are anymore. Like you said, I wouldn't even call them left. I don't think I would either. They're just kind of...
I know what they are.
Oh. I don't. But, like, we don't really have a party right now, which might kind of be a power vacuum. We see a lot of popularity with, like, AOC, who was at that Bernie rally. Is there a future for, like, younger, progressive, socialist policy advocating for Democrats, or is it
I should
kind
not
of
answer
too
this question.
entrenched? Because is there even like a world like politically right now where we even start getting closer to implementing these kinds of policies?
I think that like any sort of massive political movement is not going to be from the government to the people. Like, it's going to take a sort of like collective conscious rising or however you want to like term that, but like, yeah, AOC going up there and saying tax the rich, eat the rich, or whatever, and wearing that dress on like the runway or whatever. It's like, okay, like, nobody. It's just like too easy for the right to just like shit all over that, I guess. You know?
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
Although I think I did see in New York, like, a lot of like her approval among Republicans is actually like rising a lot, which is kind of interesting. But anyways, like, I agree. I think the pieces are there within the people and within kind of
Pause.
I won't say cultural, but definitely like societal. Like, there.
What's the difference?
It's like I think the people are ready for a change towards something that might be socialism. I just don't think they know it.
Well, I can,
or they want to, like, they're trying to suppress that.
I can amend that a little bit. I think it might even be that individually, we all as people recognize that we're all like going through like problems, like especially Gen Z. I just watched a YouTube video. Job market sucks. Too many applications, up to like 1,000 plus for some people right out of college. A lot of people can't afford rent and food, paycheck to paycheck. Individually, they're recognizing, okay, this system sucks. I don't want to do it anymore. I want the government or somebody to change something. But I think where the society part kind of fails is people aren't really talking about this, let alone recognizing that there are theoretical economic solutions.
I will actually push back on that. I think that people are talking about it. I think it's a lack of class consciousness, though. Like, people talk about it and they attribute the problem to something that isn't. They see all of these, like, a million problems, right? A million atrocities, 1,000 things wrong every single day. They see these all as individual problems that arise from individual actors or individual problems, rather than there being one problem and like this problem has a bunch of symptoms, and that's the problem.
I will say that's not. I don't inherently blame them, especially in the age of Trump.
Oh no, I know.
Oh, yeah.
But would you also say like there's that, and like people are talking about it, they're just like, except for one or two people, they just aren't in power? Would you also say that?
What do you mean?
So like you say that people are actually talking about that.
Yeah.
Would you say that they just, one of the issues is they don't have any kind of foothold in like policy except for Sanders and AOC? Obviously.
I mean, I think that's part of it. I don't think that there's a mechanism in our government to have people who genuinely like see problems as what they are, because if they look at it and they're like, well, the problem's the government, obviously they're not going to be in the government. Like, that's just how it works. Anyone who genuinely believes that the problem is how our governance works is not going to be working within governance. And it is like designed that way. And it's also designed that there are so many things going on at once that you can't keep track of them all. There are so many bad things happening that you can't just be like, oh, this is the real problem here, and let's talk about what the real problem is.
And that's intentional.
Yeah, it's all intentional. And then even if you do finally get to that point where you're like, okay, maybe there's something wrong with our system, maybe we need to like rethink our system, then you're just like, you're ostracized basically for that political opinion.
Sure.
Yeah, and I agree that, like, you know, there's obviously a lot of people talking about like anti-capitalist and socialist like ideas right now on, like, you know, social media spaces, online spaces.
Yeah.
Like, this is happening, obviously. Even in political spaces with like Bernie and AOC. I think that like the biggest issue, and you know, this might sound like a little bit far-fetched, but in my opinion, it's like I hold it to be true anyway, that just sort of the stage that we're at with our relationship with like work and life, and what our work affords us and takes from us. It's really difficult to like get people like in community spaces in person where any sort of like, you know, action could be taken. You know, that doesn't mean violent action or whatever, but just like, you know,
It could.
it could.
In Minecraft.
Yeah.
In Minecraft.
Yeah, it does not dismiss this, but just like the idea of fatigue, essentially.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like you go to work, you're there for 8 hours, you come home, you know, if you're living the American dream, you have your kids to take care of, you have like a bunch of, like, you get home and you start a second shift basically,
Yeah.
and then you go to sleep, and then you do the same thing tomorrow. It's like, where is the time, where is the energy for people to like be sort of like building these alternative systems?
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. And even when like we as college students are in a pretty unique situation, because I mean, school can kind of be like a second job. It is, but
Yeah.
it tends to be a little more freedom with time, more socializing with, like, kind of depending on your schedule. This guy's cracked with how many classes he's taking. But more time, more people to talk with, especially your age. But then the point I was kind of getting at with people not necessarily talking about it, when I think they use the words socialism, anti-capitalism, but don't quite comprehend what that would entail. It's kind of broad, it's not very pointed. Like, I think that we all recognize, specifically more so the anti-capitalist sentiments, like we all hate working, there is no time, you start your second shift if you want to raise your 3 kids, you know. But like, we can say, oh, socialism would sound good, or socialism is really scary. Like, when we use these terms, when we get those rare moments of conversation, a lot of people don't even know like what to actually talk about, what this would actually look like. Do you guys think that's broadly true, or am I missing something?
I do, but I think that the problem is like that the Protestant work ethic thing that you were kind of talking about there, because it's not that we hate working inherently. The problem is that we're not working for ourselves or even for the betterment of like our community or our nation broadly. We're working so that way we can have enough money, so that way we can afford to live. And you have to work, 40 hours a week to do that. And then at the end of that, you're barely getting by. And it's not that you want to like, obviously there's a million things that you want to buy. Like you want to buy the newest video games, bread and circuses, all that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, like you save up all your money just so that way you can have these little trinkets and these little baubles to get you by after working for just to stay alive and then to feed your kids or, to provide a better life for whoever else. But at the end of the day, the problem with capitalism isn't that you're working, it's what you're working for and what you're working towards. And ultimately you're working towards nothing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go. I'll go after.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would want to touch on a couple things. Like you mentioned, like work culture, and then like you talked about the American dream. And I think this is like partially at the fault of sort of our country's history. Like we are a country of immigrants, and like the
Charlie Kirk would say, actually, we're a country of colonizers.
And the problem with that is a lot of people that did come here, like even though the situation here has always been shitty, it was better than what they came from, like political
Definitely.
refugees.
Yeah.
So the American dream is a thing. We just haven't grown from that since like the 1860s.
Yeah.
So,
Or
Yeah,
we
like-
regressed from the revolution. Sorry.
No, like the American dream, like it didn't change with America. Like,
No.
I get what you mean. And there was Peyton, you just like brought up our unique position as students, like in a university. And I think that and also like we don't really know what socialism means. We don't really know what anti-capitalism is. And I think that like the university is such a good example of like a kind of anti-capitalist way. This might be like a bit tangential, I guess, but when we look at the ways that capitalism has sort of been pervasive in our society, I think a lot of people, obviously we still are in school and haven't graduated, whatever. I think a lot of people reflect on their college times very fondly, and a lot of that is to do with like we're essentially living in a concept of like a socialist environment where like obviously we're not like working and paying taxes and like those taxes are being redistributed. I mean, we kind of with tuition, but like we're living in like a walkable city.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
like these third spaces exist where you can form community, where you can find these niche pockets where, there's other people existing that have the same ideologies as you. You're able to kind of like take action and put work into your community instead of spending an hour in your car that you hate driving, that you have to spend money to fill the tank, to go to your job that you hate working. And it's like, I just think that that's such an interesting thing. It's like if you want to understand what socialism like kind of could look like if it's implemented, like think about when you're in college, like enjoy this time and being able to like have free time that can be productive,
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll come back to you. I agree with that. Like for me, it's just like I get to pick when I want to go to class, like what classes I want to take.
Must be so nice for you.
Yeah, and I will say where this personal kind of anecdote falls apart is I don't work because I don't have to, at least not yet. So I am very much like living a very, very, very good life right now. But yeah, so I agree with what you're saying.
But like, yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. I love the analogy of the university as a walkable city because that literally is what it is. I mean, you have where you go to work, you have your classes, and then right next to it, you have where you hang out with your friends. You have all these spaces to study and to hang out, and then you also have all these bars and restaurants right there, and that's exactly what it is. And that reminds me, or I guess it kind of makes me think about how we're probably at least from what I know, we're the only country who has such a big culture around like being at university. And that's because of the way that the rest of our culture is formatted.
Do you think that's because, like, especially in Europe, like getting a higher education is just like almost an expectation?
Well, I think that could be part of it, but I don't think that's all of it. I mean, also in Europe, they already have those walkable cities, right? They already have all those third spaces. They have less expectation to work yourselves to death, and you don't need to because you can make enough money to live without working yourself to death. Broadly, I don't like not every country, obviously.
Right.
Some countries are like sinking into the sea. Shout out England. But broadly, yeah. I mean, the thing is, the reason that we have such a cult, I would say, around being at university, like the college experience, whereas many other countries don't, not just Europe, is because once we leave college, we enter into this like hyper-capitalist life where we lose all that free time and we lose all those spaces. We lose that community.
Yeah.
I'm also just gonna glaze like that. Did you come up with that on the spot? That analogy to universities as walkable cities?
Oh no, I didn't come up with it right now. I mean, I've had that thought for a long time. That's like an analogy that's like
it's
used.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's
on the internet.
Even to like, well, it's my first time hearing it, but like just to kind of like ground it, if it's not obvious enough. I mean, sidewalks, well paved, public transit, if you're here for free, which is so goated. I mean, the community aspect and like just kind of the whole theme of we are still working a job, right? We have classes, we have homework. Sometimes it's stressful. Sometimes we don't want to do it, but we're contributing to something that we know is ours and will hopefully like lead us to joy, depending on your sector. Probably most people are contributing to society because of the work they're putting in. That would be the dream, would be whatever career you end up doing. That's the same kind of power and I don't know, lifestyle that you want to live in your career, but then you lose that as soon as you leave. So I really like that that cult of university.
Yeah.
It's really
and,
cool.
and I'll even add on to the analogy, like at any given point, there's 100%, there are more people on campus than live in my hometown.
Yeah.
So it is just like a microcosm of
There's
like,
not more people on campus that live in my hometown. That's because this is my hometown.
You don't say.
Well, like,
Yikes.
that's kind of like a kind of closing thing, and then we can start wrapping it up. So I think that, but everybody here, at least at this table, I don't know about you actually, I'm definitely socialist adjacent. I've been getting further and further. Oh no, I'm getting corrupted by the university. Don't worry, it was happening in high school, okay? It's not the university's fault.
Shout out Peyton's parents who are going to have words with him after this episode.
They already know, dog. It's okay. But nonetheless, we have this space. We have ourselves. We have our upbringings. But we still have this broad problem of class consciousness. Obviously, not enough people are aware of the single problem with all of these symptoms. And I know that a lot of the ending themes for most of our conversations is just talk more about these things. But specifically, though, for like something as big and dubious in the cultural zeitgeist as socialism, what would the best method be for like our friends to even like bring it up in conversation or that kind of thing?
Incendiary bomb.
In Minecraft.
Yeah, I think like in times where I've had conversations like these with people from like a different persuasion or whatever you want to call it, like not using the word socialism is like such a good way to like do this stuff. It's like coming at it from more so like a moral perspective, I think has really sort of like led those conversations down a path that is, you know, more open versus like, you know, if you go up to a, you know, like a MAGA whatever, like, and you say anything like DEI or like they're just gonna like they just like literally
they lose their minds.
Yeah, something wild will happen internally for them. But like just like I always think about this kid that was in one of my classes last semester that was like very much like you know, he was talking about how much he liked Trump a lot and that kind of thing. And he also shared with me that he would have voted for Bernie in like 2016 or whatever. Wait, was that? Yeah, 2016. And I was like, oh, that's like really interesting to hear. And I've also like been witnessing like online and stuff, this sort of like Bernie bro to MAGA pipeline where it's like,
it's the populism.
Yeah, it's the populism. Exactly. They're like super anti-institutional, like anti-establishment politician. That
Someone
sort
wrote
of thing.
a paper on this.
What's it called? Just curious.
Oh man, I'm not sure if I should plug my paper on this podcast.
Oh, it's your paper. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, check out Robert's Substack after this. Or whatever. But yeah, it's like I think when you sort of level and empathize with the idea that everybody is in pretty like dire, shitty circumstances, not everybody obviously, but the majority of people are really struggling, and looking at it towards like, okay, what are like actual solutions to this rather than hitting those buzzwords that will just completely shut somebody down.
Yeah. I like you say that we talk about this and we end every conversation pretty much with like, you just need to talk more and empathize more. But like the biggest thing missing is empathy, I think. And it's like, we want a society that's formed around community. And so we have to be willing to like put ourselves out there. We have to be willing to accept that we don't know everything, or that, maybe we've been kind of assholes before. It's like, we have to put ourselves in other people's shoes more often. And like so many people cough, so many people struggle with that. I'm not unique in that. It's pretty much everyone. Like every conversation we've had is pretty much leading up to that. Like when you first had me on and I talked about how bad the election will be for women, for example, like the problem there is like we need more empathy in our society. Or when we talk about patriotism, like the problem there is like we have this unhealthy patriotism, which is like nationalism. The problem there is there's not enough empathy for other people. And that's pretty much every single thing. So like, yeah, it is kind of like a cop-out to be like, yeah, we just need to talk more. But I genuinely believe that we need to be willing to hear more people, and not just hear more people so that way we can convert them, which is something that is like pervasive, but we need to be willing to hear more people so we can hear them. And it's such a basic thing that like I feel kind of stupid for saying it out loud. But that's what it is.
Well, that was my point, as the empathy point. I'm happy that you were the one who sounded stupid, not me. I'm the stupid liberal,
worry.
remember. It's
You've
me,
been
guys.
sounding stupid all day, don't worry.
That's what I do. But yeah, and to kind of like foster empathy too, just exposure is like one thing that I've said to y'all like lots of times, and maybe everybody knows it to be true but isn't aware of it. Like one reason why like the tariffs and like all the markets going red was like bad but like mildly good is because people don't really care unless it's directly impacting them. It's very difficult for people to conceptualize or empathize with other people who have it worse. But the one way that we can do it as individuals is exposing ourselves to people, our experiences, and kind of ground the fact that not only are you struggling too, but I am as well. And let's talk about, okay, without using the boogeyman word, socialism, because I agree on that point.
I agree with
what
that
can
as well.
we do? What would that look like? And maybe start that, that
like,
chain reaction.
I think even going into a conversation with like, how can I convince this person, or how can I make them think about socialism is like a misstep. I think that like
the root of it should be empathy.
Yeah, I think that like we go into a conversation with someone that's like a MAGA person even, or like someone who's going to react strongly to what you believe, and just like understanding where they come from, what they believe, and how they got there will help you as an individual. And talking to people who like maybe more empathetic towards your worldview. Ultimately, you can't make people more empathetic, but you can make yourself more empathetic, and that will help you in every interaction for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I have something kind of unique to add on, and this like maybe the audience can empathize with more, especially those of us who aren't quite on the level of you three, is know what you're talking about. Because like when we've been talking about specifically socialism today, I haven't added a whole lot. I've just been kind of listening and then talking about other things that I know like a decent amount on. So like definitely know what you're talking about before you start a conversation.
Can I add on to that?
Oh, I might have the same thing.
Okay.
I also need to add on to that.
Is it also be willing to admit when you don't know anything?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Exactly.
I mean, like willing to talk about stuff you don't know about is so important, but not talking authoritatively. Just being like, I don't know a lot about this. Can you direct me? Willing to admit when you're wrong.
Yeah, 100%.
Like for this topic, I mean, it's my topic, right? But I also don't know a whole lot about it, which is why I'm asking a lot of questions. And I know I don't, but I recognize it's an important conversation to have. And I know that you two at least have a little more experience with it. But take this everywhere. I mean, I think we're all curious people, I would hope, and questions like
Curious
open,
cats.
empathetic questions
Yeah.
with like the intent of learning is how you fulfill that
Yeah.
and how you make those connections, find that exposure.
Especially as university students. Like that's what
Definitely.
we should be doing. We're in academics, and just I don't know, like even me, I don't know a lot about this. I would say it's not like knowledge I have, it's just how I feel. So
Back to that morality point you're talking about.
100%.
Yeah. And then like the one last thing that I had, and this kind of goes back to like how do we talk about it, is just like I agree with like the kind of boogeyman terms, but also just like kind of the meme that you sent me and Peyton, like the centrist strategy of just like talk about it in a way of like this is just like basic common sense, like universal healthcare, just stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
why don't we have this? It just doesn't make sense.
if we go
100%.
into conversations, more like conversations and less like debates, arguments, how am I going to sway
Contention
them?
one.
Or yeah, exactly. Like literally that, I was kind of speaking for the heart when I was like trashing that ASU team, where I was like, we're not really here to
I
win
wish I was here
points.
for that. We're going to talk more about it for the last episode.
It's like we're not here to score points, and this is something that applies to life. We're not here to score points. We're not here to prove who's the best debater. We're here to talk about ideas and to expose ourselves to ideas. And it was so corny when I said that at Regents Cup, but I think for real life,
it's so true though.
It's
Well,
so
it was a
true.
slam dunk. Yeah, like everybody was thinking it, but we
Yeah.
all too often forget, especially in our individualist society,
Yeah.
in a capitalist society where all you can do is compare, right?
Yeah.
Shout out Ayn Rand.
Well, and to contextualize it with like kind of the first thing I said, like right here, we're not here to prove like who's the smartest person, who knows the most about socialism. We're here to like talk
Contention
about it.
one.
Yeah.
To discourse debrief.
I think just like, we're using empathy like often in this conversation, and to sort of like define what that like looks like
That's a
in
good
a
idea.
conversation, like one of Peyton and I's like burger comrades are like
Burger comrades is such an awesome term.
Coworkers better be watching this. Shout out.
Yeah, for real. But we see the world like pretty differently politically, but we have like these really enjoyable conversations, and I think that like he does really well at it, and like I've started sort of mirroring his approach to it, and a lot of it's just like just asking questions and like really understanding why people believe the things they do, rather than just like saying, oh, you believe that, and then reacting to it. Yeah, exactly. And like one phrase that I use a lot in those conversations where I start talking about like some theory or whatever, and like, of course I'm not like any sort of authority on political thought or whatever, but like I always just say, all right, walk with me. And like I'm trying to like make myself vulnerable in that moment, and like showing him that like I don't know every single answer to your questions that you're gonna have, but like I think it's good for you and I to be figuring those out together, especially
Definitely.
coming from different sides. And there was one more thing I had in my head, but whatever. Yeah,
Brain.
Well, shoot, I mean that's like kind of the ultimate thing I think that we can all just kind of agree on, and probably is our end off point. I mean, that's
I think that's it's a really good point, because like at the end of the day, empathy is really easy if you're talking to someone you agree with. Like it's like it comes naturally, but the hard thing is, and like the empathetic people watching are gonna roll their eyes. They probably have been like neutral faced for the past 15 minutes, because it's like basic four men talking about empathy. But yeah, like if it's someone you disagree with, someone you don't even like, that's where it's hard.
Well, even I would build on top of that and say you can always find something to agree with somebody. At its core, there's going to be some experiential similarities, emotional similarities, these kinds of things. And I think that's the struggle with a lot of people, is it's very hard to find those today or to be aware of them.
well, and we forget our humanity as well.
Yeah, well, we forget other people's humanity.
Oh, definitely.
Even worse. But there will always be things to agree with, common ground. It's just a little harder to find it, right? But that's how the empathy starts. That's how it gets going, right?
Yep.
And then we have our burger comrade discussions.
I love that
You can
so much.
you can have two completely different burgers, but at the end of the day, they're both probably gonna have buns.
Unless you have celiac, in which case they will be lettuce wrapped.
Yeah,
Or our gluten-free buns at our
It's
Zinburger
crazy.
where we work. But can I have both burgers and eat them too?
No.
you can't have your burger and eat it too.
Yeah, no.
What if I have
In a
3
capitalist
burgers?
society, you cannot afford 3 burgers.
Yeah, it'll
that's
just be
true.
a slider.
Wow. I think that's a brilliant place to end it off.
Absolutely.
Shout out
Thank you.
Zenburger.
Shout out Zinburger.
Burger comrades.
Yeah, the one where we work. We are the people. We are the class consciousness
All right.
working in the burger restaurant.
All right, that'll do it
But,
for me.
yeah, thank you guys for watching episode 10. Damn. Of
I know.
season 2 of the
Jeez.
Discourse Debrief. I have been Peyton,
I've been Logan.
I have been Alex.
Robert.
and we will see you all in the next one. Oh, quick reminder, May 6th. 7 to 8:30 p.m. on the mall. We will have our final event. They are debating along with 4 other interns. I will be moderating. Check it out, Diversity in Education. Until then, until our next episode, we'll see you later.
Next
Goodbye.
episode.
Goodbye.